Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 28th of May. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather and forecasts by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. And from that point, you can click in the map to get more information about your particular village or location, or check on the places you want to go. The weather info line at 800-472-0391 is open. If you write down the numbers as you're using that forecast system there, you can get to it a little bit faster. You don't have to wait for the announcer to read off all the names to you. That's a good way to do it. Your NOAA Weather Radio is always on, of course, and on Twitter, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, and NWS Anchorage, as well as NWS Alaska can be found on Twitter 24 hours a day. Under NWS Alaska on Facebook, you'll find interesting information this afternoon about how much rain has fallen around the Kenai Peninsula, and particularly close to the Funny River Fire area. And on YouTube, every afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing that'll give you kind of a peek ahead for the next couple days. It's short and sweet and give you a quick update about what the weather is doing around all of Alaska. And of course, following this show, on our broadcast partner here, alaskapublic.org. Go down to the right side of their webpage, get down a little bit, you'll see a video player. It's got this entire show on it, so you can find it that way. You can also find it on YouTube the same way by typing in AKWX-TV at the top search bar. And if you just hit subscribe, you'll know every time the latest update has been published to YouTube. So a lot of different ways to get your Alaska weather, no matter where you are in Alaska or what time you'd like to watch. Tonight's hazardous weather, of course, still includes some strong and gusty winds across the Alaska Range and north toward the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. That includes gusty winds, so that is increasing the high fire danger in those areas. So once again, red flag warnings have been issued. Those will go through tomorrow. And across the Chukchi Seacoast, well, guess what that is? It's a winter weather advisory, and there is an opportunity for some light freezing rain. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a whole lot up there around Wainwright down toward Point Hope. But there is that opportunity that there could be some freezing rain and periods of rain mixed with snow, even further south than that. So winter weather advisory that'll go at least through midday tomorrow. And meanwhile, we're back to the fire danger. You'll notice a couple days ago we had some huge blobs of red here in the middle and down toward the Kenai Peninsula, where extreme fire danger was present across the Kenai Peninsula and also across the Alaska Range. Well, with the wind in place, that fire danger is still certainly present, but we've reduced that extreme area, at least as far as the immediacy of the burnable fuels, I believe, across most of those areas. Now, the fire danger is still high across the Kenai Peninsula, so don't be fooled. And across northern sections of southeast, there's still high fire danger there. That kind of creeps in and creeps out, creeps in and creeps out, depending on the weather. Rain is coming to southeast in the next couple days, and we have plenty of rain moving from south to north across south central Alaska, and some of that certainly will make it toward the interior, perhaps in the next 5 to 7 days. But fire danger remains a critical threat across a large part of Alaska, so make sure you're doing your part, to put out your campfire if it is even allowed in the areas that you're camping over the next several weeks. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. Coming in from the Bering, we're looking for a more active weather pattern, and we seem to have found it, at least for right now. We have a wide area of low pressure across the eastern part of the chain. That's affecting a good part of south central and southwestern Alaska, with much wetter weather. The other side of this coin is that colder air is dropping down on the west side of the system, as they always do. And with that, we're going to have periods of rain and snow across some parts of the west coast, and obviously some freezing rain up across the Chukchi Seacoast. There's another weather system behind that. In between, a brief ridge, maybe a little bit of a break between this activity and what's to come. But we have moved into a little bit more of a wetter weather pattern in many parts of Alaska, and eventually in southeast, yes, you'll get your wet weather as well. Here's a visible satellite picture. A couple things to note that we haven't really seen so far that I know of in central or eastern Alaska, or eastern interior, is thunderstorm activity. We're seeing some of that firing up here across the Yukon and northern parts of British Columbia. We haven't quite gotten there just yet. Now, in the interior, temperatures have made it into the upper 60s, in some places low to mid 70s, so the heat's there, the instability probably there, the moisture and all those things coming together at the right time, not just yet. So it'll happen soon enough. But of course, with that comes a threat for wildfire danger as well, especially if it's a dry thunderstorm. In the meantime, low pressure is working through the north and the western part of the Gulf. With that comes Pacific moisture being pushed northward, and then occasional rounds of rain working from southwest to north and east. Colder air is spilling down the west side. You can see that more of a stratus and uniform cloud cover across the west, the Seward Peninsula, all the way up toward St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait. And then we're back into that stratus and the more of the wetter weather coming in from the south again across the western part of the chain. For southeast, you've had at least a good number of days where you've had at least some sunshine. Today looked like another gorgeous day across parts of southeast and maybe even a little bit warmer than it was yesterday. But for many, the wet weather will continue working its way eastward, and eventually, perhaps by Friday afternoon, we'll start to see some of those changes there in northern parts of southeast and the northern Gulf Coast. Here's a weather map now, and the cold front that's up across the Brooks Range is kind of thrown on the brakes there, so that's not going to drop southward anymore at this time. As it does so, though, it's allowing wet weather to gather up ahead of the cold front working in across the west coast. Periods of rainfall there, sometimes some pretty heavy fog. Areas around the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and the Bering Sea coast have been dealing with pretty poor visibility from time to time. Around Bristol Bay, pockets of rain there from Shelikof Strait northward through the Kenai Peninsula this afternoon, and then dry weather for southeast as high pressure is located across the very southern edge of the Gulf of Alaska, just under 1,040 millibars. Out to the west, another ridge of high pressure there trying to build into places like Adak, Atka, and Shemya, but as we get into tonight, you'll notice it's the colder air that's going to win the night, and periods of light snow and snow mixed with rain will move into the southern Bering. We'll see waves of rain across the central chain, the Alaska Peninsula, southwest Alaska, the Kuskokwim and the Yukon Valleys, all the way into the almost interior part of the state. Not quite to Fairbanks, though. The latest forecast still showing dry weather there. Wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a tower developing there across the Brooks Range. There's just a little bit of cape or convective instability where we might get some of that upward moving air, especially with a southward moving breeze there pushing that wet weather and slightly unstable air up the hill. There's the right ingredients, the right setup to make that happen, but it's pretty marginal if it does. So we'll watch for that, if isolated at best. Out across the west, frontal boundary there still hovering very close to the Brooks Range summits. That's going to keep the cold air across the plain and keep the coldest air working down through the Bering Strait and then getting closer and closer to the YK Delta as we get into Thursday. Now what a mess this is. We've got an occluded front working into the western part of the Gulf. We've got a frontal boundary that's falling apart as it works toward Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And we still have enough colder air here to create several other waves of disturbances working across the central and southern Bering Sea. Well, this is all going to combine eventually into a nice little neat package as it crosses over the Gulf of Alaska, but tomorrow's kind of a transition day for several parts of this weather system. For southeast, we still have quite a bit of sunshine and dry air, so enjoy your nice day again tomorrow. By Friday, things are going to start to change a little bit. You'll see, well, maybe a little bit less cloud cover across the Copper River Basin and the eastern Alaska Range. Don't forget, you're going to have some stronger winds here as well. And for the Kenai Peninsula, though there will be an opportunity for rainfall tomorrow, there's also going to be an opportunity for the winds to come up, and then they're going to build up again as we head into Friday. So gusts may be on the order of 25 miles per hour around Kenai and Soldotna for Thursday. They might be a little bit closer to 35 miles per hour on Friday. So while the wet weather is certainly helping, the increase in humidity is helping, the wind gusts are going to be notable in some cases, and where wildfire is trying to be contained, that could be problematic. So keep your eye on that if you're in the Kenai Peninsula, and again, remain extra vigilant with any fire. Across the Yukon Valley, warmer air is lifting northward. That will create some showers there from Ambler to Bettles, back toward Galena, southward toward Ruby. And you'll notice the frontal boundary trying to work into the Bristol Bay. Again, that's falling apart. Now look, here's that neat package. As we get into Friday, we've got an occluded front south of, or east of Kodiak at this point. The triple point is probably going to refocus a low as we get into Saturday. So a lot of this may start to fall apart. But notice how those lines of constant pressure, the isobars that we draw in here with the black lines, are starting to tighten up. Low pressure is dropping in this case, and as that pressure field gets tighter and the lines get closer together, we know that the wind should be moving a little bit faster, and in this case the wind should be zipping right through Turnagain Arm, probably over the Kenai Peninsula and off of some of the Kenai Mountains and over Anchorage. So that is a concern as we head into Friday, especially for wildfire fighting. For southeast, you'll notice the drier air is starting to shift to the east. A better chance for rain from Port Alexander all the way up to Sitka, Juneau, Haines, and Skagway, all the way around to Yakutat. And wouldn't be surprised to see some of our favorite and wettest places on the planet getting pretty wet. Cordova, Yakutat, and again around the Horn out toward Gustavus could be kind of soggy there as we get toward the end of the week. Across the west now, not to be forgotten, Norton Sound and Nome still looking wet there. At least it looks wet at this point, but if this shifts around just a little bit more, you're going to be a lot closer to that rain mixed with snow area that we're showing here in pink, and or maybe just the snow out in Tin City and through the Bering Strait. That air coming off the ice that remains across the Arctic, well, that's going to be some chilly stuff. Some of that making its way down toward Port Hayden and Pilot Point, Dillingham and King Salmon. Don't be surprised if you see rain mixed with snow. And rain and drizzle and fog for the central and western chain, while most of the interior, including Fairbanks, Northway, Eagle, Fort Yukon, it looks like more clouds than any wet weather for you at this point. We'll have to see what happens, though, because with this low and the heat, well, we might have some instability developing there. So don't write off any showers and storms just yet, but right now we're not really confident enough to draw that in there with any big green blob just yet. Here's a look at the temperature map now across southeast. Mid-50s for a good part of central and northern parts of southeast. Gustavus was 48. Southern parts around Ketchikan and Annette, well, depending on where you were. You saw temperatures there in the mid-50s to lower 60s. Hyder was 64. Prince William Sound in the lower 50s today, and about the same there for Anchorage. Clouds in Kenai and Homer and Seward. 53 in Talkeetna, 66 in Fairbanks, a mild day there. 64 in Eagle, 67 in Northway. Look like Healy and Greeley were almost 10 degrees apart today. Fort Yukon 65, Arctic Village 54, 52 in Anaktuvuk Pass, and then the bottom fell out as you went over the hill, and temperatures are back in the 20s and 30s. Barrow only 26. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse about 30 degrees, 32 in Wainwright. Shishmaref 39. Oh, a mild day there in parts of Kotzebue Sound. Temperatures around Kotzebue at 43, even warmer in some of the more interior locations there. Once you got closer to land, 51 degrees. 39 around Nome. The YK Delta in the mid to upper 40s there, with Grayling at 48. McGrath was showing 53. St. Lawrence Island around 36 degrees in Savunga. Dillingham at King Salmon in the 50s today, with the Pribilofs in the lower 40s. Sandpoint 46. Cold Bay and False Pass in the 50s. 47 for Dutch Harbor in Alaska, and low 40s for the central and western part of the chain. Overnight low temperatures will remain mild. Along the Yukon Valley, you see temperatures all the way in the 40s from the border all the way out to the sea. Nunivak Island 35. Southeast looking at temperatures in the mid to upper 40s tonight. Prince William Sound about the same, 47 in Anchorage and Kodiak. The Alaska Peninsula in the mid 40s. The chain closer to 40 degrees. And the Arctic coast, including Barrow, at 22 with Nome at 38. High temperatures tomorrow in Barrow might make it up to 31 degrees. But notice the big difference between Barrow and Eagle. It's 77. So once again, there's going to be some heat here. 71 in Fairbanks. Meanwhile, south central under clouds and wet weather. Upper 50s in most cases around Valdez. 50 degrees for you. 53 in Kodiak. Juneau's looking at 60. 57 in Sitka. Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and looking at temperatures that are closer to the upper 50s. Same goes for Annette as well. 41 around St. Paul, and closer to 50 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. About 52 there in King Salmon. 49 in Dillingham. And we'll say Bethel, you're looking at 48 degrees for your Thursday. Flying weather is going to change for some places on the west coast tomorrow. Look for IFR conditions across the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, and a wide swath of MVFR, especially west of the Alaska Range and north all the way toward Ruby, Galena, northward toward Barrow and eastward, and from Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, and other areas just offshore and north, IFR conditions that may creep in and impact some of the airports there right on the coast. Out across the west, a wide area of MVFR over the Bering Sea as well. Most of the Alaskan Peninsula and Kodiak Island will be dealing with at least MVFR, if not occasional IFR. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are both expected to be MVFR for your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may see some improvements, but you'll start at IFR. Same goes for Rainy Pass tomorrow. Windy Pass expected to turn over to MVFR conditions through the day. Isabel Pass looks fine, as does Mentasta Pass at this point. Tanita Pass we expect to remain visual through most of the day. Portage Pass, on the other hand, should start out at MVFR and probably worsen through the day, going toward IFR by the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to remain visual. There's plenty of warm air across the central and eastern interior, and with that, those temperatures will close in on the mid to upper 70s in some parts around Eagle again. But you can see the surface cold air dropping southward fairly quickly, and even the temperatures aloft are cooling, and that's going to be cold enough for a rain-snow mix across a wide area across the YK Delta into Bristol Bay and parts of the Aleutians as we go ahead toward the rest of the week. Icing potential remains pretty high up there right now across south central and some areas west of the Alaska Range, below 13,000 feet and above 8,000 feet. We saw many areas across many parts of the state today reporting at least some light rime ice. Across the Bering Strait and the western part of the Seward Peninsula, below 12,000 and above 4,000. But once you get west of St. Lawrence Island, the bottom falls out, the cold air comes in, and anywhere below 8,000 feet, including to the freezing level or the surface, whichever comes first, could at least see some light to isolated moderate. Low pressure across the Bering is dragging in that colder air aloft and plunging it down into the North Pacific. We have a ridge of high pressure that's working with that, drawing in that southwesterly flow into Alaska, keeping the wet weather coming our way, and the Arctic jet stream is well to the north at this point. Below that, 9,000 feet shows that southwesterly flow across western Alaska. A broad southerly flow through the interior and southeast, still enjoying the effects of high pressure both at 9,000 and also at 3,000 feet. You can see the wind speeds are pretty light across the interior in all levels, anywhere from 5 to about 15 knots. More of a light westerly flow across the Beaufort Seacoast. Turbulence potential then, haven't seen too many reports of that today. Most of that's going to be below 2,000 feet for the Chukchi Seacoast and running down along the trough of low pressure to the central chain, and probably seeing some light chop around Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay below 10,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Coming up,
we're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
can the Gulf of Mexico be saved from polluted runoff? It was a flood of apocalyptic scale. 26,000 square miles of the lower Mississippi Valley inundated by water. More than 200 lives lost, and 600,000 people displaced from their homes. The flood of 1927 was the most disastrous in U.S. history, and its effects are still felt today. After the flood of 27, massive levees were put in place. And while they helped protect the lower Mississippi River basin from flooding, the levees and other human activities would ultimately harm the watershed in unforeseen ways. The Gulf state of Louisiana is the terminus of the Mississippi River, the mighty watershed that drains 41% of the area of the lower 48 states into the Gulf of Mexico.
We receive water from as far away as Montana, from Michigan to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa. All those waters drain right past this area right here.
But by the time all that water enters the Gulf, it has accumulated enough contaminants from polluted runoff to create an enormous hypoxic zone, an area of water lacking in vital oxygen.
The size of the low oxygen zone in the Gulf of Mexico is about 9,000 square miles. That's equal to the size of the state of New Jersey.
The shortage of oxygen is killing fish and other sea life and could potentially have a devastating effect on the regional economy.
We are the largest navigation port in the United States. We are the second largest in the world. We have the largest fishery in this country.
When we was crabbing, a lot of times all our crabs we dead, we can't even sell them.
The reason hypoxia should be of concern to most citizens in this nation is because it's a sign. It's a sign of the degradation of our water resources.
We're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
If you're going to have an ecological disaster caused by the offshore hypoxic areas, then that absolutely translates into an economic disaster.
So what exactly is causing this dead zone in the Gulf? Hypoxia develops when an area of water receives excess pollutants, primarily an overabundance of nutrients, which produce large algae blooms that die off and lead to low oxygen. And since the Mississippi gets fed by tributaries that flow through 31 states, that adds up to a staggering volume of contaminated runoff.
You have drainage into the Gulf of Mexico from the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, and the Missouri River. Yet each of those three major river systems are watersheds in and of themselves with their own challenges and their own problems.
The Mississippi River has always delivered a lot of water, and that hasn't changed over the centuries. What's changed is the amount of nutrients in that water.
In fact, the Mississippi's nitrogen levels in the lower Mississippi River have tripled since the 1950s. And the growing hypoxic zone off the Louisiana coast contains the disturbing evidence.
It's like a rusty color, stinky, rotten looking. You see fish just swimming sideways, gasping for air and stuff like that. And when you pull up the nets, not one shrimp alive, all dead, orange. The fish, they rotten, like melting away and stuff like that. Can't breathe stuff, and it's just rotten.
This is just a fact of life, the way we treat our water systems, because we use them as our garbage dumps. We use them to dilute our pollutants and things like that, and it flows downstream. I believe the statistic is that if you're in New Orleans, the water that is going by you has passed through a human gut something like 3 or 4 times before it gets to you.
Incredibly, Louisiana boasts a natural resource that removes pollutants from the draining Mississippi, the once abundant wetlands.
Plants that grow in wetlands produce these wonderful filters for everything that is coming into them. They trap sediment, they tempt chemicals, and what leaves the wetlands is much, much cleaner water.
Wetlands also provide an important habitat for birds and other wildlife. Sadly, the Louisiana wetlands are quickly disappearing.
Coastal Louisiana has lost about 1.2 million acres of wetlands in the last 100 years.
When we levied off the Mississippi, it cut off the Mississippi River water from the marshes.
In addition to the levees, a network of man-made navigation channels is also compromising the wetlands by allowing salt water to seep into the marshes.
Once that salt water travels up these channels and overflows the banks of these channels out into freshwater systems, such as this cypress swamp, that salt water sits out there around the roots of these trees and kills them. They cannot survive salt water. They're freshwater plants.
Eliminating the hypoxic zone will take more than saving our wetlands. Reducing nutrient runoff in the Mississippi River watershed is the heart of the problem. It's an issue involving over half the states in the nation and a vast array of industries, particularly farming, which uses nitrogen-rich fertilizer to grow its crops.
Fertilizers are helping the United States produce the food for the world, but there is such a thing as overuse.
There are scientists who have done the analyses and predict that you could reduce fertilizers by about 12% without reducing crop production and see a significant decrease in the amount of nitrogen going into the Mississippi River.
Experts say the first key to changing behavior is raising public awareness.
We all live downstream of somebody, and we all live upstream of somebody. So what somebody else does in their watershed affects the water that I receive, and what I do in my watershed affects the water that somebody else receives downstream.
If we don't clean up our act, our water resources, which we simply cannot live without, will be ruined. Coming up, can the water supply for 9 million New Yorkers be saved from the ravages of polluted runoff?
Nutria. Here's a look at the ice edge now. As you look north of the Bering Strait, you can see some open leads there, and that will continue as we go into that warmer season, of course. Remember that shorefast ice across the Seward Peninsula is breaking up. It is unstable, so stay off the shorefast ice all the way from Point Hope to Kivalina, Kotzebue, Shishmaref, and around to Tin City, even west of Nome and on St. Lawrence Island. Now, there's probably still some strips of ice in some of the more open areas that we have shown on the map, but if you'd like to investigate that for yourself, look at the outlook or the sea surface temperatures. You can do that anytime by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, and you can find the tools you need to make a map like this. You can drop it in your own version of Google Earth, as we do. Here's a look at the marine forecast for southeast. Now, winds are going to stay pretty light as we go through Thursday, even a variable flow south of Yakutat. 5-foot seas up and down the coast, 2 to 3 foot seas in the inner waterways, also looking at 10 to 15 knots. And as we get into Friday, though, the winds start to pick up more from the south and southeast, feeding into low pressure. You're going to start to see some rain across the northern parts of southeast. Still looks fairly dry down to the south for now. A northwesterly flow around Ketchikan and Metlakatla. 2-foot seas there, 3-foot seas in the Lynn Canal, and seas on the coast up to 6 feet, probably a little bit higher as you head out to the west. Thursday in south central, a northeasterly flow running down the Cook Inlet, a little bit stronger when you get west of the Barren Islands, 10-foot seas there. A southerly flow coming into the east side of Kodiak and southeasterlies from Prince William Sound on the inside and outside all the way down toward the Kenai Peninsula with winds up to 25 knots there. Those increase to 30 to 35 knots for Friday, 30 knots inside of Prince William Sound. So if you're going out on the boat there, do a little bit of fishing or just sightseeing, it's going to be a little bit of a chop on the water with seas up to 7 feet. Northeasterlies coming down the Cook Inlet, 20 to 25 knots, and keep those winds coming right across the Barren Islands and right over the southern tip of the Kenai, and southwesterlies continue across either side of Kodiak Island, 7 feet in Shelikof Strait and 10 feet on the east side. For Thursday in the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies will cut across the southern tip, 15 to 20 knots there. 3-foot seas on the north side, 6 on the south. Inside Bristol Bay, 7-foot seas there, and a southerly flow coming into Castle Cape down toward Chignik. A 25-knot wind from the south, probably looking at 7-foot seas. Those climb or increase to more of a westerly flow at 10-foot seas there, up to 30 knots on the Pacific side, 20 to 30 knots on the north side, with 4 to 9-foot seas to close out the week. For the Aleutians, expect a westerly to northwesterly flow for the central and eastern part of the chain, 9 to 10-foot seas for Unalaska out toward Nikolsky, and more of a northwesterly flow as you head into the Pacific there, 7 to 9-foot seas expected. More of a southwesterly flow out of the western chain with a 5-foot sea and 25-knot winds. That becomes easterly on Friday. Winds become a little more variable north of Adak and Atka, and we're still looking at a westerly flow from Nikolsky to Unalaska and 7 to 9-foot seas on either side, 20 to 25-knot winds on Friday. For the west coast, a northerly flow dropping out of St. Lawrence Island with 4-foot seas there, a westerly onshore flow north of Nunivak Island, and northwesterlies for the Pribilofs with an 8-foot sea at 25 knots. That becomes a little more westerly on Friday. Seas remain about the same. A variable flow north of Nunivak Island. Inside Kuskokwim Bay, you're looking at a 4-foot sea, and north and northwesterly winds for St. Lawrence Island and the St. Matthew Island waters. Winds running around 20 to 25 knots. North and easterly winds will continue across the Arctic coast for Thursday between 20 and 25 knots. And by Friday, look for those winds to pick up a little bit more around Cape Lisburne up to 30 knots and 25 knots north of Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, and out around Barrow, where they become northeasterly once again. Recapping tonight's weather, there's a pretty decent chance for rainfall across the west, southwest, and south central Alaska and Kodiak Island. Southeast remains dry at this point. Cold air is dropping through the Bering Strait, and as it does so and latches onto some of that moisture, rain and snow is possible. And a winter weather advisory for the Chukchi Seacoast, including areas around Wainwright and west of Barrow, includes a chance for some freezing rain tonight. Most of that should be pretty light. Look for pockets of rainfall tomorrow as another wave of low pressure works in from the west and southwest across Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, and the lower and middle Yukon. Warmer air still traveling north. Looks like a fairly toasty day for places like Eagle, Fort Yukon, maybe even North Wave, temps in the 60s and 70s, and more rains on the way for Friday and eventually moving into southeast. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.